Vikas, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
I'm doing good, Ashu. Thank you. How are you doing?
Doing very well, Vikas. Vikas, this is an exciting discussion, right? And, I say this often, right? But this is a discussion that I've been looking forward to, right? And then that is largely because, real estate as an industry has gone through a very, very interesting time, right? And I think more importantly, the CFO's job has become, very interesting, right? In many, many ways, right? In good ways and in bad ways, right? And I think we'd love to discuss, about the industry, about a lot of nuances around, your the current dynamics around, your role, and what's happening in the industry, many, many other things, right? And I think, all of us expect that the industry is going to come out of, the phase that it's been in, and because this is possibly, one of the most significant contributors when it comes to the GDP and overall growth of the nation, right? In line with that, right? So this becomes a very exciting discussion in that sense, right? But before we dive into that, Vikas, I'd love to, take you to, a quick round of introduction, and then we dive into specific questions.
Great. No, I'm absolutely excited and looking forward to an exciting discussion here, Ashu. Myself, Vikas, I spent almost 14 years working in tech startup ecosystem. Before working with, started my journey with PropTiger or the PropTech business. I was working with a fintech company called iTrust. And prior to that, I was working with Grant Thornton in their advisory business and got an opportunity to work in different geographies in US, in UAE, and in India. Right. But essentially, I'm born and brought up in Delhi, and did my entire schooling, college, everything in Delhi. And most of my professional life has also been in Delhi, except a couple of stints outside India.
Wonderful. Because real estate is in a very like we discussed, right at the outset. It's been an interesting time, right? While the expectations are very large, there are teething troubles, right? And I think there are a lot of macroeconomic issues as well, right? Which kind of, and systemic issues, let me put it this way, right? Which are kind of affecting the sector in a certain form and way, right? Of course, and then it's a huge transition which has happened, right? But while we want to sort of discuss, while we want to jump into all of that, right? I'd love you to take us through, the construct of PropTiger as an organization, right? And there are many, many vehicles that you have now, right? Each catering to one specific aspect, within the entire value chain, right? So tell us a little more about that, and then we come to the overall industry play, that's out there.
Sure. So before I tell you more about the different aspects of what we are doing, I'll tell you how we started PropTiger. What was the rationale of starting PropTiger way back in 2011, and those were the heydays of real estate where the properties were only going up and up, and properties were selling like hotcakes. That was the time when there were essentially no technology players who were trying to solve the customer journey problem, and it was largely that you had few online platforms where you can do search and discovery, but then you land up to an offline broker who will take you to multiple site visits and so on and so forth. That's where we thought that it might be an exciting opportunity where we can create a platform which is not only helps the consumer focus on search and discovery, but we'll also have our own on-ground experience in terms of taking the customer through the life cycle of one of the largest buy of their lifetime. So that's how we started PropTiger, and we were completely focused on, while there are different facets of real estate, especially when we talk about residential real estate, there is a new home purchase, or there is a secondary home purchase or a resale purchase, and then the rental journey. We started initial couple of years, as I said, those were the heydays of real estate. We were doing very well. In the very first year, we opened 10 offices in 10 different cities, scaled the organization from 25 to 500 people, and registered very strong growth in the first 3 years. But then towards the end of 2013, the market started kind of tapering down, especially on the new home side, where the developers started finding the sales were declining, the overall sales in the new home sales market were declining very sharply. And that's when we said, how do we kind of make the business a little bit more broader and start focusing on the resale market as well as the rental market, so that we can make it a little bit more cyclical, because real estate is always a cyclical cycle. It goes up and then it comes down. We never thought that it's going to be such a long drought in the market, where we're going to see a down cycle for almost 6 years. But I think now it's not a cyclical cycle in real estate. It's more of a structural shift which is happening in real estate, and we are very positive and hopeful that going forward it's going to be a very exciting industry, as it's one of the largest contributor of GDP as well as employment in India. Now, what we do at PropTiger, we have two different verticals. One is our PropTiger business, which we started in 2011. That is the business where we partner with the large developers in India, pick up their inventory, do online marketing, and then when a customer is interested in buying that property, then our salespeople, who are equipped with the best-in-class technology, CRM, and so on and so forth, take the consumer through the life cycle of buying a home from a developer. So they help them negotiate the home, they help them find the best unit in a society, and that's how they give wonderful experience to the customer. The other vertical which we have, that's the housing.com, which is a broader platform where we have not only have new home sales, but also have resale and rental. And that's a kind of a marketplace where thousands of developers and thousands of brokers come and showcase their properties and attract audience. Once the audience find the property or the listing interesting, they get in touch with the developer or the broker. And we are also catering to the homeowner as well. They also showcase their properties for selling as well as for renting. So whenever a consumer finds it interesting, they get in touch with the seller and consummate the transaction. We are also building an exciting ecosystem on housing.com, because our thesis was always that it's not the search and discovery, but also the journey post the discovery is very, very important. So we're also building an ecosystem on housing.com, which is completely focused on post-transaction journey. So we've created a platform called Housing Edge, where we are providing the rent payment services. You can come and do rent payment to your homeowner on a click of a button. You can actually create a digital agreement through a click of a button, which is fully executed, fully signed and stamped properly. So you don't need to visit registrar office, you don't need to go to the notary and so on and so forth. That's highly customizable rental agreement. Then we also have multiple services through multiple alliance partners, like home services through Urban Clap. And if you want to find a flatmate kind of a property, co-live kind of a property, we have certain partners offering those services. And home management services are also there. So if you have a home which you want to rent it out, but you don't have time, you can come to our platform, find a partner who manage your home, rent it out, and give you the rentals. So all these kind of services we are building on the platform to give a full stack end-to-end experience to our customers.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Vikas, I want to talk to you more about the housing acquisition, right? And I think, and of course, I think you've given us a very good, beautiful perspective in terms of, how you're becoming now a 360-degree player, right? And I think I'm particularly excited about the fintech angle that you're kind of introducing, right? Which is doing agreements and then eventually sort of doing rent payments and, possibly extending credit as well, because, some of your competitors have started to do that, right? And there could be a beautiful possibility, right? Because this is a structure which can support that in a very phenomenal sort of a way, right? And there is a strong underlying which is there. But tell me, I would love to start from the housing acquisition, right? And you know what I mean, right? I think housing was something which was looked at in a certain form and way, right? And while I understand the founder's aspiration, right, that's when you're looking at buying, right, you look at a lot of other aspects, around that acquisition, right? The visibility, eyeballs, you're looking at many of those things, right? But as a CFO, right, how did you view it, right? Because this was a company which was kind of flushed with cash capital, right? Went on to create a massive buzz in the market. Transactions were still picking up, right? So I think from a profitability standpoint, and I think from, say, a revenue standpoint, right, I think they were still factors that are getting established in the process, right? So how did you view that as an opportunity, right, when you actually went in to acquire the company?
Absolutely, Ashok. So when we looked at housing was when they launched in 2012.
Right.
I mean, the initial within the first few years, they become the
Right.
poster boy
Yeah.
of digital real estate, and it
Right.
was everyone looked at them as the player
Right.
who can completely kind of disrupt the market.
Sure.
So the background of that was a very, very good product and a
Right.
very good technology, which was the big attraction for us for this
Interesting.
acquisition, and that's
Right.
what we were completely focused on.
Right.
Yes, because of certain things which turned out not so good, and
Right.
housing got all the negative media attention.
Right.
But when we looked at that acquisition and the discussion started,
Right.
we were completely focused and we were clear that what we want to achieve out of this M&A,
Right.
and that's where our diligence, our entire integration was focused on.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great. It was always a great product, and we've kind of taken it to the next level.
Right.
But we were very clear in our mind that when we do this acquisition, we will completely embrace the talent. We will
Right.
completely embrace the tech and product which is built by the founders, and
Right.
we will use our capabilities of monetizing a very strong product and take it to the next level, because
Right.
our DNA was always very sharp focus on monetization and so on
Right.
and so forth. So
Correct.
that's where a good amalgamation happened
Interesting.
in that acquisition, where there is a good product, good brand, good technology, and
Right.
we have that strong monetization DNA. We took the product to the next level, and that's what helped us
Right.
in terms of taking this platform to the next level in the last 4 years. When we
Right.
acquired, people were looking at housing that possibly
Right.
it is the end of the story for this
Right.
platform.
Right.
I mean, to be very candid, but as I said, we were very clear and focused in
Right.
terms of what we want to do. And in the last 4 years, the platform has grown almost 8x in terms of the audience or
Wonderful.
eyeballs on the platform, and we are now one among the top 3 players
Right.
in terms of competition,
Right.
and we are almost equal. We are equal player.
Right.
And if we talk about monetization, we've grown the monetization significantly. Overall, Elara Group has
Right.
grown 5x since 2017 on the back
Wonderful.
of strong growth on housing.
Because COVID has been a very interesting time, right? And it's kind of disrupted, how real estate was being, looked at, right? The anticipation and overall sales, right? And because and largely because ITITS, which was a major consumer across say urban markets, right? A lot of these people, and I think most of these companies and consulting companies are taking a very different approach, right? Where they are not necessarily now will not a lot of these large workforces are going to be limited to a certain work environment, right? They're promoting a lot of work from home, and there is a very clear reason, right? And there's a huge bottom line contribution, right? So a lot of OPEX is now kind of will eventually move to a bottom line contribution, right? Which is of course making them look much more healthier and stuff like that, right? And I think technology's kind of filled that gap, right? So I think delivery is kind of improving and stuff, right? What has now happened is that a lot of these people who were in tier one markets have actually gone back to a tier two or tier three city, which is their home market, right? And there's a surge in volume which is kind of happening in those areas, right? So you're seeing residential units sales, you're seeing a lot of land sales, you plot sales, you're seeing a lot of that, right? What's the current landscape? I mean, how are you dissecting the market, right? In terms of the next opportunity, right? What are the next 2 or 3 years going to look like, according to you, from a sales standpoint?
Absolutely. So Ashu, you actually pointed out a very pertinent question. So I mean, if I look at this is a very interesting time,
Sure.
especially for the digital real estate ecosystem, because the digital adoption due to COVID has improved so significantly in real estate specifically. Because if you look at other markets, like if you look at jobs, right? That was almost 95% completely on digital. If you look at automobile, it's massively the digital penetration is quite huge in automobile. But
Right.
if you look at real estate, the digital penetration is like 20% odd pre-pandemic. But what we have observed in the last 12 months or 14 months, the digital adoption has improved very, very significantly.
Okay.
And not only on the consumer side, who has started spending a lot of time on digital platforms in
Right.
terms of searching their dream home or in terms of doing whatever research they want to do in terms of real estate. But also the sellers or the developers, brokers, and homeowners, they've started kind of moving to the online ecosystem, whereas
Right.
earlier they were kind of completely they were trying some offline stuff, they were trying print media, they were trying some digital media,
Right.
and so on and so forth. But
Right.
I think clearly the digital adoption has increased significantly.
Right.
Now, coming back to your second question, which is how do we see the consumption of real estate
Right.
in post-pandemic era? I think this COVID will going to bring some permanent changes in our lifestyle. Whether and I don't know, but my thesis is that for sure we're not going to go back to office 5 days a week.
Right.
Uh, I don't know if our kids will going to go back to schools 5 days a week or not. I think
Right.
there will be some kind of a hybrid which
Right.
will evolve, which
Right.
will give the flexibility to all of us to whether move to tier 2 towns or tier 3 towns, because the life in big metros or big cities is very different from the life in the smaller cities. And
Absolutely.
especially the people who have migrated in the last 10, 15, 20 years in these big urban
Right.
cities,
Right.
they have their folks, they have their families in smaller cities. They move back because of COVID.
Right.
This means definitely the consumption or the demand for real estate will increase massively in tier 2 cities for sure. Tier
Right.
3, I don't know, but tier 2 definitely has already started seeing the momentum. I was referring to one report from a paint company that in this pandemic,
Right.
because all of us went back to the smaller towns, went back to our homes, they started seeing the massive demand of the paint, hardware, ceramic tiles suddenly increase in the smaller cities. And the reason
Interesting.
being because the younger people were always busy with their jobs
Right.
and were spending a lot of time in urban towns.
Right.
But when they've gone back to their hometown, spent time with their families, and they
Right.
had some extra time on their side, they started doing renovation and stuff
Right.
in
Right.
their old homes. So I think we're going to see that shift where
Right.
I don't see you will find the demand for real estate will go down in big cities,
Right.
but definitely the demand for real estate will go up in smaller cities. That's for sure will going to be the trend. The
Right.
other interesting trend which you're going to observe is Ashu, that earlier people were figuring out the smaller homes, 2 BHK, 1 BHK,
Right.
even the studio apartments and
Sure.
3 BHK. But now the demand for independent homes, the demand for land, the demand for bigger houses like 4 BHK and so on and so forth has suddenly started seeing a surge.
Right.
Because I mean, in Indian ecosystem, we all know that our homes are not equipped for a work from home kind of environment.
Right.
If I have to work, my wife has to work, and my daughter has to do schooling while being at home, I think we definitely need at least 3 different rooms.
Right.
So I think that's another trend which you're going to observe in the next few years.
Right. Very interesting. Because one area which is kind of emerged, right, and has been affordable housing, right, and that's something which has been covered in a policy area as well, right. And there's a very clear, focus that the government has, right, which is to ensure that there is availability of loans, right, and of course at a cheaper cost, right, to promote affordable housing, right, and I think that's basically, I think, agenda of any government, right, to ensure that people have a house to sort of stay in, and live in, and all of that, right. Now, one of the things that has happened is, right, okay, well, of course, there is a certain segment which is done phenomenally well around the COVID time, right? In a financial way, and they've actually gone out and spent. There is a very large segment which is not done so well, right? Which has actually lived off its savings, right? And what it's done overall is reduce the savings that per household level savings, right? And there's a huge inability which has now come in, right, from a consumption standpoint, right. So on one hand, while there is affordable housing, there is government which is promoting policy. On the other hand, when the interest rates are so low, right, when actually people should, this is the time for people to go out and buy, the ability to, I mean, the savings is kind of decreased, right, which essentially means that this is a segment which is on the ebb, right, in their ability to say, perform their consistency of payouts and so on and so forth, right, and manage other such elements. it's becoming a very, very complicated, situation in that sense, right? Some factors are very positive, some factors have become very negative, right? How do you view that, right? Because this was something which was supposed to sort of really be the engine of growth in the real estate consumption or real estate sector, right? This was supposed to be the consumption driver, right? How do you view that as an is that an area of concern or do you think that next couple of months, possibly a year, we're going to get back into the black and green, and things will improve, and we will see an uptake in that zone. What are your thoughts about it?
See, from economic standpoint, this is definitely an area of concern
Sure.
because, whatever we say that while Indian economy is very, very resilient, we are seeing very quick recovery post first wave of COVID, even post second wave of COVID,
Right.
is seeing all positive signs that the recovery will come very, very fast. But the fact of the matter is, or the reality is, that there is a massive population which is impacted, who has lost their livelihoods, who have lost their jobs, and their small businesses got impacted severely because of this COVID.
Right.
This will have economic impact, but if you ask me from the affordable housing standpoint, uh, see, the demand and supply gap in that particular segment is so huge that it's going to take few years for us to bridge that gap.
Okay.
And yes, there is a large population which is impacted because of COVID, but still there are a lot of people who can still afford to buy a home. And now it has become, while housing for all was a mission for government of India, but now because of COVID, the realization in people that home is possibly one of the safest place for all of us has grown so significantly, and that's where people want to own a home so that whatever happens, they can sit at their home. Their kids can do their education. They can do whatever offline or online office or remote working. They can do it from their home. So that need for house has increased significantly. So because the demand and supply gap in that affordable segment is massive, I don't see that impacting a lot in terms of the activity which is happening in affordable housing. Yes, it may have impact on housing for all mission for sure, because government may not be able to achieve housing for all within the set timelines, because even the government also has budgetary constraints now because of COVID, and also the people at the lower level got impacted because of COVID. So that may definitely get stretched by a couple of years. But as far as activity is concerned, I don't think that is going to get impacted.
So what you're essentially highlighting is that this is a deferred demand, right? This is not demand destruction which has happened. This is a deferred demand, right? And which will essentially come back, right? So as soon as economy starts to sort of recover, as soon as that engine is sort of say back on track, right? And I think we've seen signs of that, right? I think as soon as post, I think August last year, I think we've signs of recovery, right? I think people have gone back to consuming, right? And I think Indians are very resilient in that sense, right? Because I want to talk about in the international market, right? There's been a huge participation from NRIs, right? From residents abroad who've actually come in and bought real estate across pretty much all the markets, right? How has this phase been for that? I mean, is there a surge in that segment? How has their participation been in the last 1.5 years?
So I won't call it a surge. I would say it's more or less staying at the same level, where people staying abroad, or we call it NRIs, are buying real estate in India. We've not seen any kind of massive shift in terms of either an uptake or a decline in demand from that particular segment. Because pandemic by definition is a global thing. And we've seen people are impacted more in some of the geographies like Middle East, which was always the biggest consumer as far as the NRIs buying home in India. A lot of people are impacted in terms of their livelihood in Middle East. In fact, a lot of repatriation has happened from there. So buying home from that particular segment is not the case. Unemployment levels were very high in US, which was the second big consumer as far as NRIs buying homes in India is concerned. There also people were impacted in terms of their job or livelihoods. So we've not seen either a decline or a surge.
Right.
The percentage contribution coming from that segment has stayed more or less the same.
Interesting. Because I think we've discussed enough of macros, right? And I want to deep dive, right, or kind of dive into the CFO's story, right, of leading an organization in very very difficult times, right? And I think the way I look at it, right, is while the CEO or the founding team essentially sort of leads the narrative, right? I think CFO is the person who largely brings in the sensibility, right? And is the guy who's possibly standing at a distance and is able to visualize the situation with a little more sense of deeper sense of reality, right? And I think has to calibrate also in terms of prioritizing many things, right? And I think the role becomes very very important, and especially in an environment like the one we've been, right? Tell us a little more about that, right? That was a very very difficult time, right? The last one, little over a year has been a very difficult time, right? It's been a time of unpredictability, right? How has that impacted you as the CFO, right? How have you been able to prioritize, right? It kind of disrupted pretty much all the activities that any business did, right? It deferred a lot of, say, for example, revenues, right, that were, say, to be collected in the market, right? It disrupted a lot of costs. It brought in a massive unpredictability in the entire overall operations, right, of the business. As a CFO, how have you looked at that as in the last 1.5 years? How has that period been for you?
So I think to put the things in the right perspective. See, I think while as a CFO, you're right. I won't call it sensibility. I will call it objectivity. The founder or the CEO brings the passion,
Right.
brings the vision,
Right.
and drives the entire organization in that direction. And as a CFO, while you also need to partner with the founder or the CEO in
Right.
terms of growth, but also being a numbers guy, you need to bring objectivity to the table
Right.
and put the facts in the right perspective.
Right.
So that's what we've been doing fairly well, I would say, between me and Dhruv for the last almost a decade now. So if I talk about the last 1.5 year or 1 year of pandemic, how this has impacted, I think this was the time when we were suddenly kind of thrown into an era which we've never thought of, or we were not prepared for. Whether an organization like us or maybe a very very large organization, all of us were caught uncovered to handle something like this.
Right.
So when this happened, I think the first course of action for me was to look at our cost, because there was a more stringent lockdown where the entire economic activity was halted. That how do we make sure that we don't completely burn out in the absence of your revenues and in the absence of the money flowing into the business? So how do we align our cost structure so quickly in these difficult times so that we don't completely burn out? We don't know when the markets will going to open up, because that was a very very uncertain time. And we were all conjecturing, will this be a 6-month period? Will this be a 1-year period? How much time the economy will going to take to kind of return to the normalcy? Real estate was anyways going through one of the worst periods. So we said, will it going to be a further kind of derailment of the activity for another couple of years, and so on and so forth. So we took, but the good part was, because this was a very, very widespread impact. So the entire organization came together, and it was not generally in some of these situations when the cost cutting or some of the tougher measures needs to be taken, it's the CFO who takes the lead. But I think in our case, the entire organization came together. Every employee stood up and contributed whatever form and way they can in these difficult times. So my job becomes very easy, frankly. We whatever decisions we had to make, we took those decisions, and everyone supported those decisions. And we could sail through those difficult times of those 4-5 months fairly easily, I would say. And the good part was that immediately after that July or August period in 2020, we saw a very sharp uptick in the economic activity and a similar uptick in real estate as well. So Then the entire focus shifted from making your organization variabilize, reducing your cost, to how do we kind of capture the growth? Because when the market is recovering, market is moving in the right direction, then I think the most important job you have is how do you grow your business. So that's how I think we've learned quite an interesting lessons in this pandemic. One is how do we keep our cost variable while we are a digital organization, but this pandemic pushed us really hard to think more opportunities in terms of adopting digital ways of doing the business, in terms of doing digital transformation within the organization in every small pocket. So these were few learnings, and it was, I would say, yes, tough time comes, but if you take some learnings, that's the best thing.
I think this has been a very unreal year, right? I think none of us were kind of prepared for something of this sort, right? And I think like you said, right? I completely agree with what you said, right? I think none of us knew the depth and the magnanimity of this entire issue, right? I think it just got. I think most of us off guard, right? We weren't really calibrated for an event like this, right? Because what's when you look at it, right, with that objectivity, right, as the CFO of the organization, right, what are some of those things that have changed forever, right? In the organization, right? So say, the post-COVID avatar of Elara, right? What are some of those things that have changed forever? That could be from a leadership standpoint, that could be from a structure standpoint, that could be from how you operated on the ground, right? It could be from a transformation standpoint, right? A digital transformation standpoint, right? What are some of those things that have changed forever, right? Give me a perspective of that.
I think there are quite a few things which has changed forever because of this pandemic. As I said in the beginning, I strongly believe that the way we work has changed forever. We're not going to go back to the office 5 days a week. That's my personal view.
Sure.
And even as an organization, we are taking certain steps in that direction. But what does that mean? I mean, that means potentially we need to re-engineer our organizational culture, because when you're meeting in office on a daily basis, you build a different level of connectivity with each other, and then people adapt to that culture fairly quickly and fairly easily. But when people, a couple of people in my team has joined in pandemic. They've never gone to office, right? It's been almost 10 months to a year. They've joined the team, but they've never gone to office. They've hardly met some of the colleagues, because we kind of gone back when the virus surge was very low. We gone back to office, like let's meet for a day, let's meet for a party or something like that. But they don't know everyone in the organization, right? They don't know personally, and I think that connect we all need to re-engineer. That is going to change permanently. How do we stay connected? How do I know everyone in my team, everyone in my organization at a personal level, which is very important in this remote working environment? These things needs to be re-engineered. The work culture definitely will going to change forever. The other things which has changed for the positive is a very strong focus. While we were always a digital organization, but the focus has become a lot more sharper in terms of digital adoption. I'll give you small examples. Earlier, the sales guys who were doing meetings for selling PropTiger, for selling developer homes and the PropTiger brand name, they were going and meeting the customer. They were going and meeting the customer in their office. They were going and meeting the customer at their home, and so on and so forth. But in the last 1 year, we've done so much of digital innovation in that space where we can actually showcase the entire property while you're sitting at home, and we can do a lot of Zoom calls, and a lot of those engagements are happening, which is very efficient for the customer as well as for a sales guy. Right? If he has to come and meet you in person, he has to spend 2 hours on the road first, and then either you are busy or
it's a very difficult process.
It's a difficult process. But getting on a Zoom call, it's convenient for you as a customer. It's convenient for me as an organization. Those things are changing, right? Even B2B sales, which is on the housing side, we go and sell our products to developers, to brokers. A lot of those interactions are happening in the virtual world. I think now people have embraced these technologies with an open hand. I think that has also changed completely.
Right.
Earlier, people used to say, "Acha yaar, office aa jao, fir milenge baat karenge." Now nobody says, "Acha, office aa jao." Right?
Right.
People say, "Let's get on a phone call, let's get on a Zoom call,
Right.
and let's interact." So
Right.
I think these things have changed permanently.
Very interesting. Because digital transformation for every CFO, right? If one talks to, right? In fact, every founding team, the C-suite that you talk in an organization, right? I think digital transformation is something which has become a key prerogative, right? It's become a key go-to, and possibly the number one priority, right? While of course I would want you to tell us a little more about that, right? In terms of how are you prioritizing for that bit, right? What are some of the other key priorities, right? That have uh, you know, kind of emerged in a post-COVID environment, right? And in a setting which is going to cater for the future, right? And how do you sort of, while you prepare for the future, right? What are some of those priorities that have taken shape in this particular time?
So digital transformation is one area, but frankly, that never kind of gave us a lot of sleepless night in this pandemic, because
Right,
we were a digital organization. Digital first was our DNA. Whenever we
right,
thought about anything, we said, how can we do it through technology, through tech intervention?
hmm,
That was always the thesis. But yes, the focus has become a lot more sharper
sure,
in terms of how do we adopt technology, how do we have tech intervention to solve some of the
right,
problems, some of the processes and controls. I think the change in priorities or the change in focus due to this pandemic is a lot more on the risk side.
hmm,
If you may have seen in the last 12 months, some of the largest organizations have been hit by cyber attacks.
hmm,
That's one area
right,
which is taking a lot of attention, which is taking a lot of center stage,
right,
at least for my focus, my attention, in terms of how do I make the organization ready for these challenges.
right,
Because while one part is it gives us a lot of flexibility, and that's possibly going to be the way to go. But
right,
when we all are sitting at home and working, and our servers, our organization is being accessed from 200 different locations,
right,
that exposes the organization to a lot more cyber risk,
right,
right? A lot more technology challenges. And that's where we've seen so many cyber attacks in the last 12 months. So
right,
I think that is one area which is right at the center stage, but also making the organization more resilient to some of these shocks. I mean, look at the way, and not only us, but as an economy.
right,
Look at the way when the COVID first wave happened, people were completely uncertain. People were kind of not sure what was going to happen, how much time will it going to take to recover. People were doing layoffs and saying, "Oh, this is the doomsday," and so on and so forth,
hmm,
right? But in the last 12 months, everyone prepared and made their organizations and made their ecosystem so resilient, while second wave was more damaging
right,
in terms of health issues, in terms of people personal side of the things. But people were still very, very hopeful that the
right,
moment this wave settles down, we're going to go back to the normal. And
right,
that's what has happened in the month of June. The moment the restrictions got lifted, the moment the number of cases came down, we all were kind of coming back to the normal from our personal distraction in terms of
right,
somebody in the family is affected by COVID and so on and so forth. We saw the economic activity came back, and people were not taking knee-jerk reaction or actions during second wave as
sure,
far as the business activity was concerned. So
right,
I think making your organization resilient and focus on the managing the risks for the
right.
business is an important area for any organization as a CFO.
Very interesting. I like the way you put risk in the conversation, right? Uh, I think a lot of organizations, I think across not just in India but globally, have been kind of now plagued with many risks, right? And these are, like you highlighted, right? Of course, one side of it is cyber risk, but I think there are many operational risks as well that kind of challenge the playbook, right? Right, in terms of the way it was set, right? I think organizations will have to kind of reimagine that landscape, right? And like you said, right, the interaction with the consumer is going to be so different, right? I think it's going to be interesting how it plays out. Because as I have always believed a CFO's role is also to keep a tab on policy, right? Right, and while of course And those are some that's a very important aspect, right? Because that's something which is really going to define how you really, like in the earlier question that you answered, right, which was how do you sort of prioritize some of the key areas. I think policy also kind of plays a very significant role in you going out and defining, how are you going to structure your, like I said, revenues, how is the consumer going to behave, what's the liquidity condition, so on and so forth, right? And and of course there's a lot that has happened, right, in terms of ensuring that there is confidence in the consumer and so on and so forth, right? What are some of the key things or key policies that you think that need to be looked at to ensure that there is enough confidence in the economy, and and for the real estate sector specifically, right? That could ensure that the demand is back, and and largely because of the role that real estate sector plays, it becomes important to sort of go out and resurrect that sort of a confidence, communicate for that confidence, right? So, what are some of those policies that you think need to be and should be looked at?
So I think there are quite a few things which the government should look at in terms
Sure.
of the policy framework for this particular sector. I mean, look at the irony. While real estate is the second largest contributor in the GDP,
Right.
it is the second largest employment generator for the nation,
Right.
but it still does not have the industry tag, right? It's still not considered as an industry, right? The moment government consider real estate as an industry, a
Right.
lot of avenues gets open in terms of access to the credit.
Right.
And right now, the biggest challenge which the real estate industry is facing is access to the credit. Right. While the government is doing some of the right steps in right direction, which is keeping the interest rate low, and real estate and a lot of other businesses are the biggest beneficiary of that.
Right.
Real estate also, because in real estate, credit plays a significant role during the
Right.
construction cycle, or if I have to buy a home,
Absolutely.
the interest rate plays a significant role in terms of decision making, right? Well, the government is doing the right steps in terms of keeping the interest rate low, but right now, especially post IFL disaster, when the NBFC is completely kind of vanished in terms of giving credit support to the real estate sector,
Right.
or credit support to the developers, banks are still not ready to lend to the real estate sector. I think there's some policy intervention or government intervention has to happen. That's one area. Getting real estate qualified as an industry is another area which definitely the government should look at. The third area I would suggest, which is very, very important from the demand side, see what's happening. You may have seen quite a few cases where the development has happened and suddenly some particular regulatory body came in and say, oh, this particular development is not as per this particular guidelines and so on and so forth, and hence this is illegal, right? And more often than not, you may not have heard of those regulations or those guidelines in your day-to-day life.
Right.
So while yes, as an industry player, you need to know all your laws. I'm not saying the industry player should get an excuse, but as a consumer, as a buyer, their confidence gets shaken when they're buying something which gets registered, and then suddenly somebody comes and tells, oh, this is not legal. This needs to be demolished. Right. That's what shakes a lot of confidence as far as the buyer is concerned. I think the government need to come up with some kind of I know it's a complicated problem. It's not an easy one, because real estate is a state matter. And some of these things will be driven at the federal level or the central level. Something like RERA. I mean, look at RERA. West Bengal is still out of RERA. Right. That's the challenge which real estate has. But still, I think the government need to come up with some kind of a framework where there needs to be some certification or some final approval which gives me the confidence that if I'm buying this home, nobody will challenge it. There are issues around title, there are issues around approval, there are issues, many issues, right? While government said, in fact, in RERA, that title insurance should be made available to the buyers. But it's still not become a product which is available in the market. So this is one area the government need to put in some concerted effort and bring the industry participants together, bring the state bodies together, and say how do we kind of solve this puzzle? Because
Right.
if this puzzle gets solved, you'll see with a lot of these structural changes which are already on the way, real estate will take a very different course.
Right.
Fourth, and maybe not the last, but at least one of another important consideration. As I said, the credit is a big driver for the real estate.
Right.
So one source of credit is for the developers to sell homes under construction.
Mm-hmm.
When they launch a home, they sell it to the buyers, and then buyers make their installment payments, which help developer do the construction.
Right.
So it's a kind of a funding for the developer.
Yes.
But today in GST era, if you buy a home under construction, you have to pay GST.
Right.
But if the house is completed, you don't need to pay GST.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this plays a big role when the
Right.
consumer is making a decision whether to buy a home or not.
Mm-hmm.
During construction stage. While
Right.
yes, early stage buyers, they still make that decision because it's a 3 years life cycle and they have to pay a small installment. But assume a project which is in the last stage,
Right.
which is just 1 year away from delivery. Why should I buy a home in that project when I know that 1 year down the line, if the project is completed, I don't need to pay GST? While from cost perspective, believe me, that gets baked into the cost. Right. It's not that your cost goes down, but the buyer sentiment is that I'll save 5% or 6% or 7% in buying that home, right? That makes that plays a role there. And also in GST era, another anomaly which is left out, while we say one nation, one tax, but it is essentially not one nation, one tax as far as real estate is concerned, because you still have to pay state stamp duty, you still have to pay registration charges. Why can't government do something so that bring everything in and say, this is what the GST is. Once you pay it, all right. This is your fully loaded cost.
Interesting. I think those are some very important aspects that you highlighted, Vikas, and I think I kind of understand where you're coming from. I think those local complexities are so much more important to be sorted out, right? Because I think that really determines, and I think brings in that confidence in the consumer to go out and actually buy, right? And they don't want such events, right? Whether all of a sudden there is an additional claim to the property, while they've actually gone in and say purchased or made some transactions, stuff like that. I think that uncertainty has to sort of go away, and I think government has a very large role to play in that particular bit. And I think state and center needs to come together, right? And like you said, right, I think GST has to be a more holistic structure rather than being it has to be subject to partially GST and partially to sort of say local taxes and stuff, right? That makes it more complicated, right? Because one question that I have, right, is around the role of developers, right? And it, right? Developers are the key stakeholders in the entire scheme of things, right? One thing that has happened is that some developers have actually, gone on and taken a very large exposure, right? They've created a very large leverage position for themselves, right? And I think and eventually real estate is something which gets hit the first, right? When there is any issue, right? Be it a local domestic issue or be it a global issue, right? Liquidity, the first thing that gets squeezed out of is real estate, right? And we've seen many of those traps, right? What do you think is going to be, how do you think is the role of a developer going to evolve, right? Because, as promoters, I think they're constantly chasing the next big project, right? By putting in a lot of consumers at risk, right? How do you think in a post-COVID environment, their role is going to change, right? And I think your assessment becomes very important because you're a very key critical stakeholder, right? You're essentially that bridge between the consumer and the developer, right? And that transparency at your end becomes like a prerogative, right? Literally part of your delivery stack, right? So how do you view their responsibility in this current environment?
So what you're saying, Ashu, has I won't say in post-pandemic, but this has already changed in the last 4 or 5 years in the down cycle of real estate, where the developers were taking unnecessary exposure. They were over leveraging their balance sheets and were not completing one project and running for another land acquisition and so on and so forth. That has changed a lot in the last, I would say, 5-6 years. What you have seen in the last 5-7 years, a lot of big brands like Godrej, Mahindras, Adanis, Tatas, all these big brands have started doing a lot of development in real estate sector. They're all big brands. A consumer has a lot of confidence in them. So that problem is getting solved to a large extent. Even a lot of consolidation has happened in the last 5 years in the developer ecosystem, where the developers who are not sustainable in terms of their financial positions have churned out from the market, and the players who have the right balance sheet to take care of a long development life cycle of a real estate are surviving or will going to survive. There are few who are still there, possibly somebody may say, but I think we are headed in the right direction. I think, as I said earlier, still the structural issue of providing access to the credit still needs to be solved at the government level, because real estate is a hugely capital intensive business, and unless access to the credit is provided, it will create problems for the sector. That's that. This problem, what you're highlighting, has also been solved as far as the consumer confidence is concerned. After the introduction of RERA, I think RERA has introduced a lot of stringent penalties for the developers of not delivery. Not only for the developers, but for the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. Like a broker is held accountable for mis-selling, right? And if the developer is selling a project and not completing in time, is held accountable, and there are very severe penalties, including imprisonment in case they do not deliver the project in time. So I think that has played definitely a positive role in terms of the consumer sentiment.
Right. Interesting. Because I'm gonna actually. So this is a more holistic question, right? And I think we're gonna get out of the seriousness of real estate, right? Around seriousness, in real estate as a sector, right? Off late, and I'm sure this is something that you also, I think each one of us is kind of viewed, right? Is there a huge surge in inflow of capital that has happened, right? And all of a sudden, the sentiment around India has kind of changed, right? In a pre-2020 environment, right? India was essentially a market which used to operate in many layers, right? There were like a lot of regional complexities and stuff like that, right? And all of a sudden, with come COVID, and just about the first 3-4 months were, of course, a little bit of an uncertainty. But, post that, there's a huge surge in capital which has happened, right? The liquidity is amazing, right? Valuations are going through the roof, right? A lot of these companies are not necessarily very strong on their revenues, right? How do you view that, right? You've been there as a business. You've possibly operated in a revenue-first environment, right? You're not seeding in interaction. Interaction and engagement is important, right? But it's not taken the place of being the primary currency, right? In your business. What do you feel and sense of this exuberance that's around the India market, right? Do you think these valuations are justified? It's do you think it's a good run? It's a good time to sort of be raising capital. How do you view this?
I think this is one area we all are amazed to some extent. Even I've been talking to a lot of public market analysts and people who keep a close watch on public markets. Forget about private markets, because private markets, the valuation game is very different. But even in public market, the valuations are fairly quote unquote rich. I think potentially this is a shift in the way the businesses were perceived or the businesses were valued. Businesses were valued basis their balance sheet, basis their earning potential, as is reflected today, right? But I think now, which was happening a lot in the private markets, but I think that is now catching up in the public markets as well, where the businesses are being valued at the potential of earning, at what the potential of earning of this business has over the next 10 years. I mean, talk about the valuation of Tesla. Forget about India, right? Talk about come to India. I mean, right now the talk of the town is the valuation of Zomato. Somebody may say it's fairly rich. Somebody may say no, they have a massive potential of earning in the next 5 years,
Right.
and they may completely change the way they operate. So I think it's hard to predict, but few things which are very important. We will going to see a massive shift in the way the businesses are being valued
Right.
over the next couple of years. India definitely will going to gain because of this COVID, because the entire globe has realized a decentralization of their supply chain system.
Right.
And beyond China, India definitely catches a lot of attention for
Right.
two reasons. One, because of our capabilities in terms of
Sure.
providing labor and resources, and also because of our massive domestic demand as well.
Right.
So India definitely catches a lot of attention from all the global players in terms of setting pace in India.
Right.
The third is India was always, I mean, look at since 2000, we were always ahead in terms of technology. Look at the global tech firms, it's the Indian talent which is sitting there. Look at
Right.
the last 10 years, what we've done in terms of the startup ecosystem, so many disruptive models, whether
Right.
it is Flipkart or it is Zomato and so on and so forth,
Right.
has evolved on the back of tech, right? So our tech talent is very strong as a nation. So that's another area which is catching a lot of attention. And fourth, which all of us know, is massive liquidity. I think that is causing, because European governments or American government has plugged in so much of liquidity in the market to deal with this pandemic. It
Right.
has to go somewhere, and there
Right.
are no alternative investment channels right now except
Mhm.
equity. So everything is flowing into equity.
Right.
So I think you will see maybe a little bit of correction
Right.
in some time once you gradually start seeing the liquidities kind of drying out in the market. But
Right.
I don't see it will fundamentally change the way the company is being run.
But do you think the valuations are justified right now? I mean, and for every 1 rupee of earnings, I think there's a 100x of a valuation that is being given out, told out, right? Do you think that's justified? I mean, honestly, I find it to be a little more complicated than that, and I kind of find it difficult to kind of wrap my head around it, right? Because on one hand, the savings rate is continuously falling. Job creations is a big problem. I agree there is an age, there is an appetite, there's exposure right now with the first technology. And possibly we are a market which is a very touch and feel market, right? And I think this thesis has become very important, right? And critical, right? There's possibly a tracing back which is going to happen. So as soon as and it happened last year, right? As soon as we opened up, the markets, people were back on the street, right? I think given an opportunity, I think we want to go out, right? I think that's essentially who we are, right? That essentially means the dependence on digital might diffuse a little, right? So do you think this exuberance is going to normalize, right? I know it's a difficult one in its in the sense, right? But do you think it's going to diffuse a little?
So anecdotally, as I said, while there are multiple components which is
Sure.
playing out to this valuation game right now, but we all know that liquidity is playing a massive role in terms of these valuations,
Right.
which we're seeing either in private market or in public markets,
Right.
And given the fact is that this liquidity will going to dry out at some point in time, the interest rate will start going up, and you will see the valuations getting corrected. But
Right.
I don't see fundamentally it's completely shifting in another direction.
Right.
There is a fundamental shift which has happened where the valuations are being pegged to the potential of earning rather than the earning,
Right.
and that will not going to change. Yes, there will be some correction, which is a kicker or a premium which a lot of companies are getting due to enough liquidity in the market,
Right.
and the liquidity typically chases the leaders in the market or the best
Right.
companies in the market, and it'll correct in some time.
I think
Not a massive correction.
I think in India, I think liquidity is kind of coming in to seed the market, right? I don't think they're necessarily chasing just the winners. I think it's all across the board, right? I think even early stage companies are kind of raising the valuation. I mean, raising the kind of money that they are, and absolutely phenomenal valuations. It's almost replicating what kind of valuations that you sort of have in the valley, right? And I think I kind of agree with that, right? I think it's an interesting time, right? And I think when this is being done, why not participate, right? As a business owner, I think there is a certain thought you know.
I think either all of us will going to be proven wrong, all right? We don't know.
Right.
But yes, I think this is a very strange time where we all are learning so many new things because it's an unprecedented time.
Right. Because we're towards the end of the conversation, right? What are the next 2 years like, right? I would have, classically asked you a 5-year period, but I think we're just into dynamic times, right? So what are the next 2 years like, right? For Elara, for each of your vehicles, right? What are the next 2 years going to look like?
We are very clear in terms of our journey for the next couple of years, Ashu. So as you know, we've been recently acquired by REA,
Right.
and REA being a globally market leader in terms of digital real estate. They are one of the largest digital real estate company across the globe in terms of
Right.
market cap. They want to take Elara to the same position which REA is in Australia. So they are the market leader by a massive difference in Australia. And our vision is that we want to get to the similar situation in India, where we create a big margin in terms of our leadership position in India. And that's what we are focused on. So we want to get to the leadership position in the next couple of years. And in this journey, we want to make sure that we provide wonderful experience to our consumers who are either using our platforms or interacting with our organization in any form and fashion on the back of superior technology being used in our organization.
Interesting. Vikas, last question, right? Which is actually more, more gyan, more mentoring, right? What would be your advice to many founders who are out there, right? Funded, not funded, right? In terms of prioritizing cash flow, what will that be?
Prioritizing cash flow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's very important in the journey of a startup that few things. One, you should know what are the important KPIs you need to focus on. Sometimes you get distracted with too many things, but frankly, you can't chase or you can't run into too many different directions.
Right.
Decide what are the important KPIs where you want to grow the business, or you demonstrate that you're headed in the right direction, and accordingly create your plan. In terms of specifically to cash flow management or cash management, dissect your cost structure into what is the OPEX and what is the CAPEX, and not in an accounting parlance, but in the business parlance, right? Because sometimes we get confused with the accounting parlance, to be very frank. Accounting parlance is a very different way of looking at things. But in terms of cash flow management in the startup eco journey, so to give you an example, a lot of companies did a lot of discounting to change the consumer behavior. Right. And they know that if the consumer behavior gets changed, they can actually monetize and recover all the losses which they've incurred in the past. Should it be OPEX or CAPEX? Accounting parlance, it's OPEX. But if the money well spent is able to deliver the change in consumer behavior, I think this is an investment. Right. That's how you need to dissect your cost structure. Look at what are the OPEX, what are the CAPEX. Make sure you do investments, but you don't lose money on your operating expense. Right. So make sure your unit economics positive. And you're focused on your right KPIs. That's what I would suggest.
Interesting. Because it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time out. Right, I would have wanted this conversation to go on. I have so many questions specifically around real estate. What are the possibilities? What are the emerging trends? But I think we'll save a lot of that for the next time. Thank you so much for taking the time out. It was a pleasure to have you with us. Look forward to having you with us, guys.
Thanks a lot, Ashu. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you.